Good morning. We just went through 27 years of our life in about 4 minutes. I'd like to share some things that happened to Benji and I and my kids that meant a lot to us, taught us a lot of things about God. And some of you have heard bits and pieces of this and maybe the whole story, but for those people, I'd like for you to think about what the story is saying. Not necessarily the details of the story, but what it's teaching you about God. And so as we go through it, think about that. When God gave Abraham a promise in the Old Testament about his heritage, he was going to have as many children as the stars in the sky. And he waited for this to happen, and it didn't happen right away. So Sarah, his wife, came up with a plan of giving him her maid, Hagar, to start this bunch of kids he was supposed to have. Well, that plan was not the greatest plan, but God was in it regardless. And so it ended up that when Hagar conceived, she started looking at Sarah in the wrong way. She started lording it over Sarah, that Sarah didn't have any kids and she had a kid now. Well, Sarah got real upset at her and went to Abraham, and Abraham said, just do what you want to do with her. And so it got so bad, she got so hard towards Hagar that Hagar took off. And she was pregnant, and she took off into the wilderness. And as she's lost out in the wilderness, not knowing what to do, pregnant, she was sitting there. God came to Hagar, and he spoke to her, and he told her some things that he told her about, that she was going to have a child named Ishmael, and he was going to be a father of many, many people. And Hagar, this was profound to Hagar. It was a profound experience. And she, when the angel of the Lord, which I believe was the Son of God at that time, a pre-incarnate visitation of the Son of God, but when he finished and left, Hagar looked up and he says, "You're the God that sees me. You're the God that sees me." And that, when I first read that, I thought, well, that was kind of neat that she came to realize that God saw her in her situation and gave her counsel in her situation, that God was a personal God. And this is probably the center of what I want to try to get across to you today, is that God is the God that sees us, that sees you. And he's not a faraway God. He's a God that sees you in your circumstance right now. That's the kind of God we serve. Now, when Hagar saw that, the angel of the Lord told her to go back to her mistress and submit to her. But anyway, the point is, I want to talk about the reality of the presence of God in your life as a believer right now. The reality of it. Now, we know it up here, okay? But there's days we live that we don't ever think about that. But that's our fault. It's not God's fault. He doesn't move in and out of our life, okay? He's there 100% of the time. We move in out of fellowship with him, but he doesn't. In spite of our sin, in spite of our weaknesses, in spite of all the things that we do, God does not move in and out of our life. He's there 100% of the time. Okay? You know, chronologically, the Bible starts talking about God looking down and seeing the children of men. And then it goes toward God coming down in the Son to the earth. And then it goes towards the Spirit of God in you. Looking down, coming down, in you. And that's what we're going to talk about, the reality of God in you and what that means. The ministry to the Yukee was an interesting ministry. It was a people that lived in... we had to go into the jungle and build an airstrip. That's what this picture's all about. We thought that probably we were going to have some wounded people or maybe sick people. We had to get out pretty quick, and we were pretty far from civilization there. So we went into the jungle and built this airstrip with chainsaws and wheelbarrows and shovels and a lot of sweat. And we set it up, and we eventually, this is an overview of the airstrip, and the camp's that little spot on the right side. We had 5 houses in that camp. That was the Rio Bivora contact camp. And the Rio Bivora means Snake River. And you see that river right there? Does it look like a snake? That's why it was called Snake River. So we started that contact work. It actually was a continuation of what New Tribes had been doing earlier with another group. They had reached another group before we got down there and settled them down in an area called the Chimore camp. And we went down for the second group to reach out to the second group, which was separated from the first group. It was individual work. The Yukee were people that were totally separated from civilization. The only thing they knew about civilization was what they could see through the trees at a farm, watching a farmer. That was the extent of what they knew about. They had no contact with civilization. Any contact they had was with these things right here. They were afraid. They thought that all outsiders were spirits of their dead that had come back to haunt them. So they saw any outsider in that light. They didn't see him as a real person. They saw him as a spirit. Well, they had some terrible beliefs that we had to work with and take into consideration when we started with them. One was they believed in killing for the dead. If one of their people died, they had to kill another person to accompany that spirit so that spirit would be happy. And when he got up there in the sky, he wouldn't hide all the animals from him and make them starve to death. Another thing, they believed in killing girl babies. If they had enough women, they'd watch a woman bear a child and they'd pick it up. If it was a girl baby, one of the men would just take it and bash it against a tree and throw it off to the side. They believed in killing outsiders, any outsider. They shot. They didn't talk, they shot. So, lovely people, huh? Killing was their way of life. Kind of a shock to our system when we first met them. Another issue was they were dying. They had no medical help. They had problems with fungus in the lungs because they were always breathing smoke over a fire, and they lived in a very damp area, and so that would take a lot of them before they reached 40. Civilization down there, or the outsiders, the people looked at them like you look at a rattlesnake. Get rid of it. Shoot it. That's the way civilization looked at them. So if there was any contact between them and the people that lived in the area, that's the relationship they had. Rattlesnake, shoot it. And that's what they had. That's what they were putting up with. Okay? And of course, with reason. But, there was a big but here. But God loved those unlovely people. And they didn't know it. They didn't know about it. He loved them. Well, after we started work with them, we hung gifts out in the woods, and I wanted to tell you something about this before I put them away. There's 2 kinds of points on these arrows. This is called, I don't know the name for this, but this is what they used to shoot monkeys with, or any small animals. It was small. Okay, anything bigger than that, like a bigger animal or a person or something like that, they use these tips. This is called a bleeder tip because it would let the blood come out faster if they penetrated your body. So this is a bleeder tip. You might hear me refer to bleeder tips. Now they're bows they made out of palm tree, and these little guys that were shorter than me would pull that arrow back past their ear and shoot it. And they were good shots. They could take a little bird out of the top of a tall tree with these arrows. They were very good. There's a lot of story I can't tell you today. We don't have time. So I'm going to take out a section and tell you something that happened. We came to a point in our sporadic contacts with them that we saw we were not making any headway with the teaching. When they'd come around about once every month or two, we'd spend 5 or 6 days with them, and then they'd be gone again. And the next time when they came in, they forgot everything we taught them before. And so we came to a point where 3 of us one day said we're only going to be able to advance this teaching if we live with them. If we go in the woods, sleep with them, hunt with them, and live with them. So 3 of us decided to do that one day. And it was right after a contact with them when we thought, well, we're going to catch up with them in a day's time because they've only been gone for a day. So we took off. We packed enough food for one day. You know, throughout this story, you're going to say, well, you were really dumb. Well, I was. Okay, it's okay to think that because I was. We were. And so we missed a lot of stuff we should have picked up on, caught real fast. So we left to catch up with them in a day's time. Well, at the end of the first day, we hadn't caught up with them. So we got together. There was a fellow named Alan Foster, the American missionary, and a fellow named Felix Ovalis that was a Bolivian missionary that was with me. So the 3 of us, we got together and we decided, are we going to continue to go on or are we going to go back? And it was kind of like hit and miss for a little bit. And then we decided we're going to keep going. So we did. And we caught up to them actually the next evening. We were walking through the jungle. We had a trail. We could follow their trail because they had a big pig and we were just following the pig tracks. So when we caught up to them, we came in this area and there were 2 burial shelters off to one side. And we thought, okay, they've slowed down because somebody died. 2 people died. And so we hooted like we did. We'd go, woo, like that real loud. And they would hoot back. And that carried pretty good distance, so it worked fine. And so they hooted back, and then we came together. Now understand, we knew these people very well. We knew their families, their kids, names, everything about them. We had established a relationship with them at this point. And so we came together and we told them what we wanted to do. We wanted to travel with them, be with them for a while, hunt with them and everything. And they talked together and they said, well, you can't sleep in our camp. So we're going to take you about from here to the parking lot away from their camp. Now in the jungle, that's a pretty good ways. And there was a little clearing. They said, you can camp here. So we sat down that night, talked about what we're going to do with them all around the fire. And they said, we want to go hunting the next morning. And hunting monkeys, because that was their delight, monkeys. And so we bedded down for the night. Several issues in the night. That big old pig they had kept running around our tents. We didn't sleep. We didn't sleep at all. In fact, I kept shining my flashlight out my little tent window and found out later that was a good thing I did that night, okay? Next morning, an hour before daybreak, the Yuki came into our camp, 5 of those guys, and there was 3 of us, and said, let's go. So we took off. We had our guns. We were going monkey hunting, so we took our guns, and they took their bows and arrows, and we left single file down the trail. It's dark, but the trail was pretty good. You could see it. We got down the trail a ways, and they said, we always carried our fishing lines in our back pocket because that was survival gear. So we came to this point, and they said, put your fishing lines on this stump right here. Well, we thought, that doesn't make sense. But we did it anyway, because we usually always did what they said, even though we didn't understand it. So we put our fishing lines on this stump and kept walking, got a little further, and I saw some monkeys on the right side. So I ran over to shoot a monkey for them. And they said, come back, come back. Well, that was even worse as far as understanding, because they never turned down anything to eat. Never, ever. And reminds me of somebody I know, but I won't say his name right now. So we kept going, and right at daybreak, I turned around, and I was the third guy in line, and then 5 Yuki behind my back. I turned around and I looked, and every one of them had bleeder tip arrows. Now that didn't make sense at all to us, because we were going to shoot monkeys. You don't shoot monkeys with bleeder tips. So when we saw that, finally it was piercing our mind that they were taking us out to kill us. Now it took a while for us dummies to see that. I mean, the fishing line thing and the not shoot the monkey thing and all that was all speaking to that. Well, when we saw the bleeder tip arrows, we thought, okay, 3 of us, 5 of them, they're going to try to kill us. Now, what would you do at that point? Well, we had guns, and we could have turned around and faced them off, but we never did that and never wanted to do that, because if we ever shot one, it would be to send them to hell. So we didn't do that. We came up with this story about we had to get back to the camp to call our wives on the radio. We had a little portable radio we took with us, and so we told them that. Well, they didn't like that, but we did turn around, and we were all feeling the pressure of this thing, because we hadn't really slept in 2 nights, hadn't eaten in a day and a half. So with the anxiety of that fast walk in the morning, we were wiped out physically. And so I remember when we turned around, I stepped down to step over, right before this, I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, would you protect my back? Now, I had asked the Lord for things like that many times up to that point. We've been working with him for a few years at that point. And God had always come through with me. He'd always come through with what I asked him. And so I was totally confident that he was going to come through that time. So I asked him that, and I turned around, and I went to step across a log, and I saw an arrow point coming out my chest. One of those bleeder tips. And the impact of the arrow just threw me down on the ground. And then God started a little class with me, okay? The first thing that happened was it went through my right lung. The first thing that happened was I couldn't breathe, okay? I was heaving. Forgive these personal things, okay? But they do show us something. I was heaving to breathe with all the strength I had left to try to get just a few breaths out to keep living. Well, that didn't last long. It didn't last long at all, and I lost my strength. I couldn't breathe anymore. Now, what do you do at that point? Couldn't breathe anymore. Well, I looked up because I knew I was going home. Well, something happened to me, and this comes under the title of an experience, okay? And you can do what you want with this experience, because I know sometimes experiences are misleading. But the experience that I had at that moment, I felt 3 things real strong. I felt the holiness of God. I felt that I was going to face a holy God. I felt the depth of my sin, my depravity. And those 2 things alone could have killed me, okay? They could have killed me. They were so strong. But then I felt the wonder of the shed blood of Jesus Christ and how it prepared me for that moment. And that was a wonderful thing for me at that point. I wouldn't have lived if that hadn't come in. that I knew I had accepted Christ. I knew that I was under his blood to go face God. I knew it. Well, after I went through that little 2 or 3 minute little thing, I actually started breathing real slow, enough to keep me alive, okay? Started breathing. Well, the 2 guys that were with me, they didn't know what to do. The second guy, they only hit 2 of us. The second guy, he was spinning around to see why I hollered, and it hit his shoulder blade and came out. Didn't go in. So he wasn't impaired very much. And so they started praying, and I'm laying on my side watching those guys, and they're praying and asking God what to do because nobody knew where we were. You get that? Nobody knew where we were except God. Okay? We were an hour's flight from the city. We were like 15, 20 minutes flight by helicopter from our main camp. We were walking, we were like a day or a day and a half away walking. So we were really out there. So I'm watching Felix and Alan pray, and they decided that Alan was going to try to go back and get our radio at the camp we left that morning. And so Alan left, and I was thinking, I was getting encouraged. They're going to get a call out, going to get a helicopter in here and get me out. So I was kind of thinking very natural. I wasn't thinking about God and all his power and everything. I was thinking about me getting out of the woods and living, okay? Happened to be a human, okay? And that's what I'm sharing with you, my human thoughts. Well, when Alan left to go get the radio, he came back in about 5 minutes. It was like a 45-minute walk. He came back in about 5 minutes, and he was just shaking all over. Because what they had decided that Alan was going to go face those Indians, going to go face those Yaqui people alone after what they just tried. So he lasted 5 minutes in the process of accomplishing that and came back. And I'm laying on my side, I'm looking at Alan, being very human, and I'm saying, Alan, if you don't get over there and get that radio, I'm going to die. That's what I felt. Well, they prayed again, and Alan left again. This time he made it back to our camp, which was a little ways away from the Yaqui camp, and he found they had ripped our tents up and taken most of our stuff, but the radio, they'd thrown it off to the side. So he got the radio, turned it on, got a call out to help to the city, to our place in the city, and things started happening on that end to get me out of the woods. Well, when he got got the call out in town, they found a helicopter to come in, and so the helicopter started on its way. And I'm by that time, Alan had brought the radio back to me, and I could hear what was going on, and it was kind of encouraging. A lot of people, all the mission boards in Santa Cruz had risen up to try to help in this thing. And the helicopter was coming in, and I was just kind of thinking that big, beautiful thing is going to come over my head and get me out of here, get me to town and everything. And, well, the helicopter did come into a certain point. He brought some people that he dropped off that was kind of like the ground crew that was going to come in on the ground and get to me faster. And then it went back to the base camp to wait on news from the ground crew to come in, and it broke down. Well, I'm hearing that, and I'm thinking, that's the thing that's going to get me out of here, and it's broke. Vanjie was dealing with that too. She had to face that. And so when it broke, they called another helicopter, and it was coming, trying to get across the mountains from Cochabamba into the lowland there, and a storm started walking down the height of the mountains there, and they had to turn around and go back. It's another failure, which I was listening to. Now the team that helicopter brought in and set down in an area, they cut trail from 12 o'clock noon till 9 o'clock at night and never found me. Okay? Now I'm hearing that on the radio, I'm hearing these failures. And so at 9 o'clock at night, I didn't have any water. I was losing a lot of fluid. I was dehydrated, couldn't hardly breathe, and I heard something wonderful, really wonderful. You know what it was? Rain started coming down. And I thought everything in me kind of got ready to receive some of that rain. And I looked up and I saw a hole in the trees. I could see a star. And I said to the Lord, Lord, send that rain down that hole or I'm going to die. Now, I fully believed that the Lord was going to do that. I stuck my tongue out and it quit raining. Like I turned it off with my tongue. Okay? Now, a lot of failures, in my perspective, I felt like when that happened, I felt like I was still dealing with the fact God didn't answer my prayer about the shooting. Still trying to handle that. And all these other failures. So I started the night very discouraged. The last message Vanjie got was he probably is going to die. He's not going to make it. So that's the way we started that night. Well, my dear brother, Bolivian brother, started walking around with a leaf and dumping those droplets of water in a leaf, and he would bring it back to me and drain it down my throat about every half hour. And he did that. He was cutting vines, draining the fluid out of vines, and he did that all night long and kept me alive all night long. Now, when morning came, I've never experienced a morning like that morning, okay? When morning came and I saw the sun shining down through the trees, I felt like I've never felt in my life before God's awesome presence. And that's what we're talking about, God's presence. And I know that this is an experience, but it's an experience that illustrates the truth. I felt so strong, His presence with me, that I didn't have any fear. Now, God listening to me talk, I lost my fear. I lost my fear of dying. I lost my fear of anything that would happen adversely. In fact, I was kind of like in a pretty cool state. He was there. In reality, He was there with me. He knew everything. I felt like Hagar when she says, God sees me. He knows. And you know what? That was enough for me at that point. I didn't have to hear anything about a new helicopter, anything about anything else. I was so encouraged by His presence with me that He had it all under control. I didn't understand it, but He had it all under control. And He gave me that understanding. That's what I needed. I needed that understanding. Well, one of the biggest things my heart was bursting over was I wanted to tell Vanjie and the kids I was still alive. I knew what they were going through with because they were facing losing a husband and a daddy. And when I saw I was still alive the next morning, I wanted with everything in me to tell them I was still alive. Well, my battery was too weak on the radio. Couldn't get the message out. A friend of mine named Tom Bush was a bush pilot, okay? He was flying crisscross patterns across the jungle, hoping that he might see something. And you know, you don't really see anything from an airplane over the jungle except green. That's all you see. Well, on one of his crisscross patterns, he crossed right across the top of me. And this was a Cessna 206, okay? So it wasn't going real slow, but he buzzed right across the top of me. I hollered at him. I keyed the mic and hollered at him, and he heard me. Now, that was the first news that had come out from that spot since 9 o'clock the night before. And he started circling, and I could talk to him. Now, he got the word out to Vanjie and the kids that I was still alive. And everything started different that day, okay? It was almost like God said, Now get this. It's almost like God said, okay, I'm going to let you guys, all you missionaries, give everything you can give with your machines and all your wisdom and everything to get this guy out, and I'm going to show you how far that's going to get you. It was almost like he said that. We didn't get anywhere the first day. All we got was failure after failure after failure. But then it was like God said, okay, this day's going to be different. I'm going to show you what I can do in this situation. So he started working. Well, during that time, the ground crew finally made it in to me, finally found me. I'm talking about like 9 o'clock in the morning, that morning, after I had that good time with the Lord. Then when the ground crew came in, they brought some IVs in and plugged me in. It felt like air conditioning. When he put that sweato, what do you call it in English? IV. When he stuck the IV in. And basically I was okay, stable. I was okay. And but when they a lot more to this story. I'm trying to keep it short. Believe me, I'm trying to keep it short. After the ground crew came in, they were able to, the helicopters came over to right where I was, looked at the situation and said they were going to have to go back, get chainsaws, drop them down on a rope through the trees, and the people on the ground are going to have to cut a landing pad out because they can't carry me back out the trail the ground crew came in on. It would be too rough. Now, remember, I still got the arrow stuck through me, okay? And so they dropped the chainsaws down. They opened up a hole. My friend Tom, that was in that fixed-wing airplane, went back and got on board the helicopter to show him where I was. They came over again, and the helicopter was hovering over this big hole, and I'm laying on the ground looking at it thinking, wow, my way home. So when he came over the hole, now there's the pilot, which we found out later was like a drug runner pilot that had his own business, but that's who God raised up. God uses all kinds, and even me. And so my friend Tom Bush was on board, and he came over the hole and he says, it's too small, not going in there. And Tom grabbed him. Okay, Tom told me this later. Tom grabbed him on the shoulder and said, you're going down. And I guess he had a pretty authoritative voice because he obeyed him. So he came down and hovered off the ground, and the guys on the ground shoved me on board with Felix, my partner that kept me alive all night, put us on board, and he started out, and I'm feeling pretty elated, and then he hit a tree. Helicopter, you know, with the blade of a helicopter, you can hit a bird and it'll knock it out of sync and cause you grave problems. This helicopter took a limb off that big around off a tree, and it was a big limb with a lot of foliage, and everybody on the ground was just spreading out because they thought the whole thing was coming down. And I was laying on my side looking at the pilot, and he like almost jumped out the side door. Seriously, he was like this when I was watching him. But he didn't. The thing kept flying. And we got up above the trees, and they got me to our base in the woods, and then on another airplane they sent me to town. And the doctor that worked on me, he said, you know, when they opened me up, I was full of maggots. Isn't that cool? I was full of maggots. And the way the arrow had come through, like, God's pretty good with details, you know, pretty good. So this arrow is spinning like this when it hits me. Well, it hits me with the smooth side down, goes right across my liver so hard that it left a big red mark on my liver. If it would have been like this, I wouldn't be here telling you about it today. Because if you open your liver up, you're gone. But it went across smooth side down and just burned a streak across my liver and then came out up here. Well, when in the hospital, they They cleaned me out, sewed me back up, and about a day later, I started feeling excruciating pain again. And there's like 3 or 4 doctors around my bed looking at me, trying to figure out, and some nurses, trying to figure out, why has he got so much pain? I mean, it was more than you'd normally think for like what I went through. It was more than that. And while they were watching me, they had left where the arrow went in open for drainage, okay? And while they're watching me, and this is cool, okay? While they're watching me, a maggot jumps right out of my back onto the sheet on the bed and crawls across the bed. And this nurse, I was watching this nurse. I don't know why, but I was. And she went, ah, and ran up the hallway. And 15 or 16 more jumped out. Okay? Now, some of you probably know already that was a good thing, because those little guys ate up the bad stuff and brought it out. So I don't look at them the same way you guys, when you said, ooh, I don't look at them like that anymore. They were my little saviors that cleaned me up. All right? So what I want to know is, now we knew the guy that shot me, Tomas. And after some days in town, 2 weeks, something like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, something like that, I heard on the radio that the Yuki had come out to our camp where we worked out of in the jungle. And so the next day, I flew out there because I wanted to see him. In fact, I wanted to see Tomas. So we're sitting out there, and I'm sitting in a house watching the entrance, like those doors back there from the jungle. I'm sitting there, and a big rain comes, just one of those jungle rains comes, and I can't see nothing out there. And while I'm looking, all of a sudden, it clears up, and there's Tomas standing right there in that oval, okay, with some of the other Yuki. And so me and some other guys went out there to meet him. And as I approached Tomas, he just looked at the ground like this. He thought I was dead, okay? He's just looking at the ground. And I went up to him. This is God, okay? Not Steve Parker. I went up to him, put my arms around him, and I said, Tomas, I love you. Don't worry about it. You know, that had a profound impact on Tomas. And he did come to know the Lord as his Savior, like 6 months before he died. Okay? I mean, I'm talking like within a year of that time, he came to know the Lord. And when I look back at, there's so many things that this teaches me about God. God knew Tomas was going to die, but he didn't want him to go into a Christless eternity. And God marshaled a team of churches and people to get the gospel to Tomas, because he loved Tomas. He loved those dirty, stinking people. And he marshaled people to get the gospel to him. And he's still doing that. And so, I guess the thing that I want to ask you is, how about my prayer? I have to work back through my failures, okay? The failures. The ones that just about wiped me out. What about my prayer about protecting my back? Did God do that? Did he answer it? He answered it, although my back went through terrible things. And I can stand up here before you today. He answered it in a wonderful way. I just didn't know that I was going to go through that first. When you're in a trial and you ask God, you plead to God for something and it doesn't happen right away, wait a while. Because after that trial, you're going to be able to look back and see that God was faithful in the middle of it, even though you didn't think he was being faithful when you were going through it. Okay? God accomplished his purposes through dumb missionaries, through hardships, hard things, and everything. He accomplished his purposes. And I praise him for doing it, because we have no credit in that thing. That God did wonders. Now, in closing, what I'd like to say to you is, I told you that the main point of this message is that God, His presence is in you and with you more than you even know and believe. And when you talk to Him, we think that we bring God into focus and talk to Him every once in a while. We think we come to church and bring God into focus and worship Him once in a while. Well, that isn't the way God sees it. He's there already. You're going to carry Him right out that door just as much as you had Him in here. He's going to be with you out that door. He's going to be with you next week in every aspect of your life. David said in the Psalms, he says, "You've hedged me behind and before, and you've put your hand on me." That's the way David saw God. And he said, and get this, how do I make that work for me? How do I bring that into my focus where it stays with me instead of me just taking trips in and out of that understanding? How do I make it real to me tomorrow and the next day and in the middle of a trial that I'm going to face? How do I make that real to me? Well, David said, listen, I have set the Lord always before me because He is at my right hand. In other words, the truth is that God is with you. God is in you, and it's a reality. But you have to set Him before you. Your responsibility, and this has helped me a lot understand this. I like the understanding that I had to yield to that truth. You have to yield to that truth. You have to yield all your arguments against it. I don't feel Him. He was close to me last week. He's not close to me this week. All of that stuff our flesh brings up. You have to yield to the truth that He's close to you no matter whether you feel Him or not. That He's there. And it's a yielding thing. It's a yielding of your thinking, your feelings, and all that. It's a yielding to the truth of the Word of God. You're permanently indwelt by the Spirit. You cannot do anything to chase Him out. He's with you through it all. Well, I want to leave you with these statements right here. It's what David came up with in Psalms there. He hears me, He sees me, and He knows me right now. You got that? He hears you, He sees you, and He knows you right now. And you need that in the middle of a trial. You need it when you're not in a trial, that He's there. Thank you. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for the reality of your presence. God, you know how much we stray in and out of that understanding. God, I pray that today will be a permanent mark on our hearts to never forget that you're with us through it all. Through it all, you're with us. And God, we love you and thank you. Thank you for letting us come together as a body this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.